The Mind Flayers are some of the most interesting creatures in the Dungeons & Dragons universe, with significant importance in the plot of Baldur's Gate 3. They hold many details that would be worth exploring in all their lore and the history of these tentacled beings in greater depth. Because, as I said, they have a very deep story within the D&D lore. If you've already played the latest game from Larian or know a bit about D&D, you probably have an idea of how these creatures behave and function at a general level, the tadpole, the tentacles, and so on. However, you may have missed some details about them, so let's start discussing all of this in depth. The Mind Flayers have a tall and slender appearance. We could even say a somewhat skeletal build, which makes them very recognizable. However, it's not just their body that catches the eye, but also their large head and the tentacles coming out of their mouth, which play a significant role when these beings feed on their prey, more precisely on their juicy brains, as these are their favorite dish. They use their facial tentacles to grab their victims and then pierce the skull with their mouth to access the brain directly. And something very curious that you might not know is that they consume the brain not only as a food source but also to absorb the victim's memories and experiences, making them increasingly intelligent and powerful as they feed. These creatures originate from the interdimensional empire known as the Mind Flayer Empire, which, at its peak, dominated vast regions of multiple planes, subjugating entire civilizations. At their height, they were extremely advanced beings, both technologically and psionically, which made them formidable when it came to controlling anyone who opposed them, turning them into slaves and tools for their expansion and control. Their method of propagation, and turning others into mind flayers, who in turn continued converting others, is through a process known as Ceremorphosis, where they deposit a small tadpole into the body of their victims, preferably human-shaped, as this makes the transformation process easier and more compatible. Once the tadpole has been inserted into the victim, usually through the eye or ear, it begins to move towards the host's brain. Upon reaching it, the tadpole starts devouring the victim's original brain, replacing it with its own neural mass. And over the next few days, this tadpole not only consumes the brain, but ultimately transforms the host into a fully fledged mind flayer. Once this process is completed, the new mind flayer has all the knowledge of the original host. However, their original personality has been completely erased and replaced by the mind of the new creature. The Mind Flayer born this way is no longer the original person but a new being under the control of the Hive Collective. So, in a way, we could say they don't have a personality or soul as such, but are more like pieces in an elaborate plan, tasked with continuing the Empire's expansion. These tadpoles that are introduced into the victims are produced in the cerebral pools, a kind of liquid-filled well where they live and grow under the supervision of an elder brain. This elder brain is a very important part of their society, as it's an extremely powerful psionic creature, essentially a massive brain that resides in a nutrient pool and is the leader and center of all the activities of a Mind Flayer hive. This collective brain governs the Mind Flayers and serves as their connection to a hive mind. The brain would naturally be telepathically connected to each of the Mind Flayers, making them operate as a single unit, maintaining order within their expansion. The most interesting thing is that all Mind Flayers, upon dying, transfer their memories to the brain, making it increasingly wise, with immense intelligence and experience accumulated over the centuries. In Mind Flayer society, the elder brain acts as judge, leader, and god. It is respected and feared by the Mind Flayers, who revere it as the supreme authority of the colony. One of the key points in the history of the Mind Flayers is their enmity with the Gith, a race of humanoids that were once enslaved by the Mind Flayers. The Gith, oppressed for centuries, eventually rebelled under the leadership of Gith, their heroic leader. This revolt was devastating for the Mind Flayers, as the Gith rebellion not only sparked an internal war, but led to the eventual fall of their empire. The Gith freed themselves from their yoke, but this victory also resulted in their own fragmentation into two factions: the Githyanki, who became warlike warriors led by Vlaakith, and the Githzerai, who chose contemplation and the study of order in the astral plane under the leadership of Zerthimon. This revelation from the Gith led to the near extinction and complete destruction of the Mind Flayer Empire, causing the few survivors to take refuge in the Underdark, forming small colonies and staying there for a long time. All of this, in turn, caused the Mind Flayers to seek at all costs to regain their former glory and empire, carrying with them a great hatred for all the Giths, ensuring that their encounters always end in blood and death. Another very interesting fact about all of this is that, going back to the transformation into a Mind Flayer, Some of these changes can lead to unusual mutations, such as the Eulitharid, a subspecies and variant of Mind Flayer that is much larger and more powerful than a common Mind Flayer. The Eulitharids have greater psionic control and are often destined to become Elder Brains if they survive long enough. Or even failures like the Mind Witness, which are hybrids between Mind Flayers and Beholders, creating various hierarchies within the same empire. Additionally, the Mind Flayers have a constant fear of an entity known as the Elder Evils, or Thun, who represent existential threats to them. Some rebellious Mind Flayers even investigate and try to learn about these entities to protect their species. In turn, it is known that unlike many creatures in Dungeons & Dragons, the Mind Flayers do not use any form of magic, and instead rely on their psychic powers, being experts at inflicting and manipulating the minds of others without the need for conventional magic. The most terrifying part is that they not only see other races as inferior, but as mere tools for their own ends, or better said, the ends of the Elder Brain. It gives them an even more mysterious and alien vibe, making their actions and plans even more calculated and cold. Furthermore, it's worth noting that there are many other ranks within their hierarchy, such as scientists and soldiers, but I think what makes them most ruthless is their ambition to turn everyone into Mind Flayers. Because, as I told you at the beginning, they don't just randomly kidnap and transform people. They've experimented, in some cases, with entire races, attempting to transform entire civilizations into slaves or new variants of creatures subjected to their will. These attempts, however, have not always been successful, leaving some races scarred by the trauma and hatred towards the Mind Flayers. The Gith are, of course, the clearest example. So that's a bit of an overview of these famous creatures, from their intention to control various civilizations to their downfall in the war against the Gith. The way they propagate and their feeding on the brains of their victims make the Mind Flayers some of the most dangerous and feared beings in D&D, not only because of what they are, but because of what they represent. As I mentioned before, their methods of expanding the dominion of their unit and empire are terrifying. Tell me, did you know more in depth about the story of the Mind Flayers and the Elder Brains, or did you just have a vague idea? Let me know in the comments, along with your opinion on everything we've talked about. If you want to see more videos like this and also support the channel, don't forget to subscribe, and of course, give me a like if you made it this far. I hope to see you in the next one.